join in. So we're talking today about youth safety and wellness. Kind of an important topic going on right now. This talk was totally created as something else, but I felt it timely that we will throw some COVID information in as it pertains. Hopefully that's okay for you guys. Oh, why is this not forwarding? There we go. We'll go through the spiel for you guys. We're recording. You can watch this again if you'd like to go back. I will also send out the slides to you guys. There'll probably be some information in here that you want. You're welcome to call in on your phone if you need to. You're welcome to ask questions. You can use the chat box if you would like. We're not going to use polls. You guys can just use the chat box if you'd like to answer those. We are using Zoom today. We've been using Zoom. Knock on wood, we have not been hacked, but if we are, we will do everything in our power to get the meeting on control, and if not, we'll cancel and reschedule as necessary. So we're going to look at the goals for the quality standards. We're going to do an overview. And if you're confused yet, we're on building block 8, and we'll go back and do building block 7 next month. So just hang in there. We're going to look at our book. We're going to go by the indicators one by one as much as possible, and we'll do a resource reminder. This was kind of quick for you guys today. Are you here for information for yourself, for others, or you're here because you've already started your summer programming and you're done, you just needed a break? Or in Melissa's case, she just had a reminder and was like, yeah, I'll do that. No. All three. That's super fair, Rhonda. That's fair. All right. So the goals for our quality standards are to define what quality programming looks like. I'm going to go fast. You guys have heard this spiel before. Serve as a foundation for decisions and practices in all settings, in all programs. So if you're watching this video later and you're a sports program, this still pertains to you. You can be a STEM program, a part-time program, full-time program. Hopefully these still work for you in some way. Establish a set of standards that support the professionalization, and I use that word on purpose for the youth development field. You guys are professionals, you're not just babysitters. You have an important job. You need to be supported. Provide an ongoing framework to advance the field and increase the quality of programs being offered. We know in our state of Idaho, wasn't a whole lot on quality out there for the majority of programs. You 21st guys got some great information, and we kind of left out a bunch of programs. So that's what we're working on the quality framework for. So we start with the building block. We're in building block 8, which is youth safety and wellness. The standard is the definition of the building block. We'll look at that in a second. And then the indicators are the actual actions that can be done to meet the standard under the building block. So they kind of, the building block's the big idea, the standard is the definition, and the indicators are those things that you can use to meet the standard. If you're following along in our book and you are thoroughly confused at this point, we are on page 20 and 21 in our book. Yeah. We skipped 7, we'll go back. We're on 8, page 20 and 21. If you don't have a book, you need a book, you can get them online. I don't know why this isn't clicking. Am I frozen? Uh-oh.
You're not frozen to me.
Okay, my computer is, however, I don't know what is going on. It will not advance the screen. Oh, here we go. What happened? What is happening? PowerPoint froze, guys. One moment, please. Oh, hi, Hillary. Hillary joined us. References to external media objects have been blocked. Uh-oh. Okay. We'll go back. I don't know what's going on. All right, there we go. You can get a book at our website if you want one, or we can mail you one if you need one. It can be downloaded free as many times as you want. Thanks for hanging in there with that. So quickly, what's your role in the organization? Do you design youth programs, deliver and design? Neither. You're here because it's stupid hot outside. Deliver and design. I believe most of you fall into C, and probably a couple of you are D. Just maybe it's not stupid hot yet outside, but certainly in Boise, I think our kids are going to be inside today because it's supposed to be over 100 degrees. You'll notice throughout this presentation, I've used, and just pointing this out, I've used programs that are already putting COVID practices into place. So as we go through the webinar today, all the pictures I'm using are programs that are open, but are wearing masks, social distancing, etc. So you should see those throughout. So the Youth Safety and Wellness Standard is defined as quality programs provide safe, healthy, and developmentally appropriate learning environments for all participants. Probably the most simple sounding standard with the most indicators underneath it. Youth safety and wellness is kind of that cornerstone that if your program is not safe, you can't operate. And normally I would give a kind of big spiel on why this is important, but oh, you're welcome, Anna. This is a video from Liv McNeil. You may have already seen it. She's a student in Canada who wrote a video and created a video on how she's feeling during this time of isolation and social distancing. And I think it's important to watch. It's just real quick. It's like 3 minutes on how kids are currently feeling in the state of times of COVID-19. And I think her video will explain why it's important, if that makes sense. It wasn't working earlier, but we're gonna try. No, okay, we're gonna do this. Maybe. And we're gonna skip Ozmo Little Genius. Hopefully. sorry. That film gets me every time. I just feel for her so much, and it's why what we do is so important. So that was created by her. She's entitled it Liv McNeil. She created the whole thing by herself, which is pretty impressive. It just explains why our jobs are so important and why youth wellness is part of this talk, is because you can't have safety if the children aren't doing well. So hopefully that was a good explanation. Sorry, give me 1 sec. I'll get through it. Super emotional person. I cry at all these videos. All right, let's talk about standards. Or indicators, sorry. Trying to hold you guys up, there you go. So indicators A and E. Program ensures a safe and developmentally appropriate physical environment for all your activities. But you also provide an emotionally safe, welcoming, and supportive environment, free of violence, intimidation, aggression, and bullying of all participants. Right? So you have to be physically safe and emotionally safe. It's not enough to be one or the other. If you're confused, right? These two specific indicators are in several other prior building blocks. Building block 1, intentional program design. Building block 2, supportive relationships and environments. Building block 3, use voice, leadership, and engagement. And in building block 4, responsiveness to culture and identity. And you can also find bits and pieces in your family engagement building block as well. That's why they are in the order they're in, right? We want you to have worked on all of this prior to getting into necessarily youth safety. This way you can check these boxes and you'll already have looked at this in depth. But just to go over a couple of points. So how can you build a safe and supportive environment in your space? We've talked about this and talked about this and talked about this. It's pretty much the #1 thing, right? You have to have positive relationships with the youth in your program as well as their families, right? And you have to have spaces that reflect the youth in your surrounding community, right? That makes them feel safer and more willing to participate in your programs. Hopefully, and I know space is always an issue, but if you can carve out spaces for reflection, spaces for creativity, spaces for activity, that way all of your students start feeling more comfortable, right? There is always a space that is for them. And more important than anything right now, if your programs are open or planning on opening, please create space in your program where children can go when they're overwhelmed, right? They're going to be stressed, period. We know that. This is a traumatic and shared crisis nationwide. If they go back to real-time face-to-face school, it will not look like the school that they left in March. And that's going to be, it's going to feel weird. Your program is not going to look like it did in March, right? Probably if you're open now in summer, it already doesn't look like it did in March. So create space for kids to have a space they can go. They may fall asleep, right? They may just want to be alone. They may want to be social, but create those spaces where they can do both things. You have to talk about bullying, violence, and aggression, and you can't shy away from the hard conversations. And I know the inclination is to talk about kindness, empathy, and compassion almost instead. Like, I want you to talk about those things and how those things look and feel. But if you avoid the conversation of the opposite end of that spectrum, you're doing your kids a disservice. You have to talk about both, and you have to talk about it often. Encourage your youth leaders to be proactive and always provide a way for kids to report bullying and violence, either to you or another trusted adult in your program. As a provider, you have to be aware of different kinds of bullying, right? It's not always going to be the kid who punches a kid in the arm for milk money, right? There's so many ways now, right? It's online, it's subtle comments, it's sarcasm and rolling eyes, right? All of that impacts, and you have to keep an eye out and watch for the signs of all of those things. And when I say violence, I don't necessarily mean only violence between kids who don't like each other. Violence comes in relationship violence as well. And so you have, for those of you who have kids that are older and in relationships, watch that as well. Indicators B and C. Program provides a variety of activities, information, education, and resources to help youth identify and manage their physical, social, and emotional needs. Program promotes positive health, safety, or health, nutrition, and safety. Mental and physical health has always been important. And when we wrote these standards, certainly we were thinking of average mental and physical health, and certainly we're not considering times of isolation and crisis, right? And so this has become even more critical, not less, but more critical than it has been in the past. So if you can, if your programs stay closed, or you are closed, or you go through cycles of being open and then closed, as much as possible, check in with your youth and your families, even if they're not physically in your program, right? That connection is even more important now than it ever has been. In your programs, if you have a space, you know, a wall board or something for resources, awesome. Keep a binder, start today if you don't have one, of just printing off or finding or filling out lists of resources, right? We have a ton of families without food, without shelter, without jobs, medical care, where to get it, where is it free, testing sites. Anna told me there was one at Rite Aid. I didn't even know that. So, and I like to think of myself of having a lot of resources. That way it's already ready to go. And then when you find out that you have a family in need or a child in need, you know where to send them. You already know, right? 211 is super helpful. If, you know, to just call, they have those resources. But if you can call resources for your area and your neighborhood, and you know every church that has a food pantry, and you know when they're giving out boxes of food at the school district, right? Then you can promote those things and help families the second you hear about it. If you have kids in your programming and your programming is open, take that moment. That's why there's this photo here of this programming of a child on a computer, but there's also a child socially distant. This is before masks were required, so they're not wearing their masks, and you have a child doing some yoga and stretching poses, and it's super critical. Make sure that they're stretching, they're breathing, they've gone outside once during the day, and that they have time and a place to talk. And yes, even if that is socially distanced and masked, that they have an opportunity. I know in my behavior training, I say proximity is like the best way to curb, right? You want to be right next to your kids, and that's not going to be possible. So you still have to find a way that they can talk and communicate with you, right? Yes, Sheena says, connect with your school day buildings and contact them for resources. They have entire resource departments. Your district does, your schools do. If you can get their resources so that you have them as well, because you never know who the trusted adult to a child will be. They may not go to their school counselor, they may go to you, and you want to have the same resources if you can as the school so that you can give them out. That's a great point, Sheena, thank you. Make sure you guys as providers are watching your own mental health and your physical health, right? It'll do no good for kids if you break down too. And breaking down's normal, but right, if you have to, take breaks from social media, take breaks from the news, be informed, but take a break when necessary. It's overwhelming. Stay calm. Practice staying calm, right? Panic doesn't solve problems. We've all felt panic in this situation and this year, and that's that deep breathing. It's the same thing we teach to kids. Practice it yourself. Take a break. I know I've had to take a break from my own children, right? We've had to walk away. We teach it to children, we got to practice it ourselves, right? So I'm not going to cover nutrition specifically, but as much as possible helping kids, especially those that may be in food insecurity times, you know, this is the time to help as much as possible. And I have more on that if we want to talk about it, but we're short on time. Indicator D, this is an important one. Program has clear policies and procedures in place to protect the safety of all children, youth, and staff, including abuse prevention guidelines and reporting protocols. This is critical. I like to think of abuse prevention in a 4-part process, and you have to have all 4 pieces to truly provide abuse prevention. The first are those policies and reporting procedures. And these are just some questions to think through. There will be some templates on the website in the resource area that I will get up today or tomorrow of policies and procedures if you don't already have them written. So can staff or volunteers be alone with children? And that's not, oop, I'm kind of freezing. Hopefully it catches up. Think about if you have to self-isolate a child because they have symptoms of COVID. Do you have an adult with that child? Will they be nearby? Are they allowed to be alone? Keep that in mind when you're making your COVID policies. Physical touch between adults and children, or children between each other. High fives okay, but hugs are not. You know, like where's your comfort level, and then you need to try side hugs versus front hugs. Kids will come in for a hug. They love hugs. I'm a hugger, but make sure your staff and your volunteers know where your line is for your program and why the line is. Can staff and volunteers meet with children outside of program? And that includes transportation. So if you are transporting kids and you pick up one kid first from their home and now you're alone with that kid, is that okay? Or do you need to have 2 adults in your van to pick up children or drop off children? So think that through. What about bathroom supervision? Can kids go to the bathroom alone? Does someone need to stand outside? Is it okay if a counselor goes into a bathroom where kids are by themselves? So just some thoughts on your policies and procedures. When you talk about reporting, who reports? How do they report? Is it written? Can it be oral? Is there a timeline? Where does that report go? And then 2 kind of huge questions. When and how does your report go to a family? If you're not suspecting a family member and it's a staff or volunteer, or children between each other, when and how and who reports it to the family? And when and how do you contact authorities, right? Have that in procedure so that it's just a, right? We did this, we did this. That keeps you responsible, keeps your staff members responsible, right? Makes it easier if you go to families or authorities that you've done all the process. You know, it's not a fun topic, but being prepared is better than not, right? You have to provide your staff training, and you provide staff training in a whole bunch of areas, not just on policy and procedure, although you do need to train in that, right? You can get training on trauma, mental health, child development, and behavior are critical. They're actually part of the protective factors. The more you know about child development and behavior and what's typical and what's not, the less likely kids are going to experience abuse, because your frustration level goes down with kids, right? Because you're like, this is typical, this is normal, and then you're less likely to yell or cause abuse situations. Create student lessons, right? Most common method of preventing child abuse is talking to children about child abuse, right? Have them model, role play, rehearse. You can do this at the same time as you do bullying. Anna and I provided some curriculum to South Junior High in their after school program on aggression, drug use, and we had kids practice like how to make friends, how to say no, right? Those things are all protective factors. They all help children in times of abuse. They know they can walk away, they know who they can talk to, they know how to say no, and you have to practice, and it's super awkward and kids get real weird about it, but practicing is really, really helpful. And then provide family education. right? And we do that because educating all the key players in a youth's life helps wrap children in protection, right? If the parents know and the kids know and the teachers know, right, they're less likely to experience times of abuse. I'm going to stop for a second because I talked about abuse prevention really fast. Does anyone have questions here? Lots of, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, do you happen to know if there are like virtual opportunities for family education around this? Like maybe it could be something really easy for our parents to access for us to provide.
Yes, Strengthening Families is provided in webinar form or on online learning forms, and they can totally take for free the Strengthening Families series, which talks about the 5 protective factors. As far as child development and behavior, there's tons of training that parents can take that are free or low cost. Or if you guys have parents who want to learn more, I can certainly look at certainly doing the child development and behavior trainings. I have parent versions of those.
Okay.
That I can provide if you would like to do a webinar with parents. And then we're working on, for our summit, getting some ACEs and trauma training recorded that will be available and provided to you guys as well. And then also BMI, if any of your teams took the Behavior Management Institute, it's not for parents, but certainly for providers, this next go round, we'll start a new Behavior Management Institute cohort, but we're also, the next level up will be trauma, and then it will be mental health, specifically for SEL learning, but also as an abuse prevention guideline.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to know if our directors are interested in that, but I know if we could find tools that we can help our families understand, but I mean, sometimes I feel like the professional development or the trainings out there for parents are, you know, a little bit too fast and above. And so maybe just kind of building and making something our own. So yeah.
So Dalila, we did the parent training at Dalila's site. And it would be great to get feedback from them, whether that went well and whether that would be possible on an online platform.
Okay.
And then I did it over at South and over at Whitney for parents as well, and that went super great, or I felt it did. So it is possible. We can always work on providing that. And then I'll make sure to put a link to Strengthening Families training in the resources so that you guys can access that. That is free to all parents and providers. It's great training.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So indicators F, G, and K. There's a lot of indicators, so we're trying. Hillary, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that one specifically. There's a lot of Strengthening Families training. They're all under the same umbrella of Strengthening Families. So as long as it covers the 5 protective factors, they're good to go. I would take any of them. I know Children's Family Trust does it here in Idaho, but it may not be on their website specifically. I'd have to find it, but it is available in a lot of places. Yeah, you can if that, again, if it covers the 5 protective factors, you're good to go. Strengthening Families is a brand. So indicators F, G, and K. Program has clearly outlined procedures, and this is where we're going to talk about COVID in a minute, for emergencies, including, but thank God I put not limited to, fire, natural disasters, and lockdowns. Staff and youth are trained as appropriate. The program has clearly outlined procedures for staff if youth are injured or become ill during a program, including notifications of parents and guardians as appropriate. Again, when we wrote that quality standard, we were thinking like the flu, and now this means something totally different, but we'll talk about it. Staff notifies families regarding issues that could impact the health and safety of the youth in the program, and again, this took on a whole new meaning when I was writing this training recently, right? So first and foremost, every program should have an emergency action plan. Sometimes it's abbreviated as an EAP, specific to their site and community. So if 21st or the YMCA or Boys and Girls Club have an emergency action plan, that plan needs to be tailored to the specific site, literally the address and place in which you are. So make sure that that information is geared to your site in your community. Weather events in Northern Idaho may not affect me in Southern Idaho. Where I take kids in an evacuation plan is going to be completely different at my site than at your site. So just make sure that your action plan is specific. You have to have a plan, practice the plan, and you have to communicate the plan so that everyone knows the plan, right? An emergency action plan will not be effective if there's people in the chain that don't know the plan, right? The plan will collapse at that point. Your plans need to include information about your program, your address, your phone, who's in charge. I recommend having a takeable binder, right? Something that can move off site if needed to, right? It can't live just in your computer. I would recommend it living in your computer, but it also needs to live in your phone, in this binder, right? Just in case. You have to have all the emergency numbers that you can think of: fire, police, poison control, your electric, your gas, your water, right? Because if your program is flooding, who do you call immediately? If you're a rural program, where's your nearest ranger station? You might need to put your local hospitals in there. If you can think about it, put it in there. Doesn't hurt. Evacuation plans for both on-site, like you're able to evacuate your site and stay there. You just can't be in certain rooms, or you had to move outside. But if you have to evacuate off-site, your program has shut down for some reason, there's a fire, whatever, and you have an off-site plan, do you have reunification plans for parents and transportation to get off-site, and where do you go, right? Have to think through every contingency. And do you have emergency supplies both in your building and to go? If you have to move your kids off site, you still need to carry with you emergency supplies, right? Especially if it's a huge emergency. If we've had an earthquake and you've moved off site, and you might have to have two sites. If we can't go to site A, we've gone to site B, right? Depending on the nature of the emergency. Child and parent information that's portable, right? Should be in that binder at all times. You should have a copy, your director should have a copy, right? If you have someone above the site above that, they have a copy. That way you can always get a hold of parents and have your child information with you in case of emergency. Like I said, you got to practice the plan, right? Emergency signals. We've talked about this in behavior. If you have an attention signal, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, or a certain thing that you guys say, your emergency signal needs to be different. Whether that's a whistle, a blowhorn, whatever, it's that thing that when kids hear it, they know they have to stop immediately whatever they're doing. And then you have to practice the emergency signal, right? Just as much as you practice your attention signal, practice your emergency signal. Escape routes should not only be posted, but practiced. How do kids get out? They've heard the emergency signal, right? And now you're going to direct them, and there's going to be multiple routes, and they're going to have to know, okay, we go out this back door. If this door is unavailable, we all line up at this door, whatever it is. If you're outside already, what's the emergency plan to get back into a building or get back into your transportation, right? Practice, practice, practice. You can be on a field trip, some rural areas, and see a bear. Now what do we do, right? We have to get back in our bus. How do we do that without kids screaming? No one likes a fire drill or a lockdown drill, but it does help kids feel safer and confident if they know what the drill is, right? You just have to do it. Stinks. I don't like it either, but we have to do it. And again, this goes back to staff have to practice being calm, right? You have to remind yourself to take deep breaths, that you're in control, that panic doesn't solve anything. You don't want to see the bear or the fire or whatever it is either, but you're in charge of all these kids, and the kids will stay calmer if you're calm, right? So think that through. What do I do in this emergency situation, that my heart rate's up here. I'm going to tell you, my child's in a very small swim class, and literally yesterday, a child stepped off the bench. He went under, he could not touch. The teachers were in the middle of the pool with a couple other kids. So I had to get up, throw that kid in the pool noodle, grab him by the arm, pull him back to safety. And the only way that happened is because I remembered, like, okay, he can't touch. Okay, well, we're gonna grab him, right? No one panicked, everyone was fine, coughed up a bunch of water, but we were all good. And we just have to keep that calm. And it, because I was a lifeguard and practiced this over and over and over and over and over again, I was able to do that without freaking out the whole group of kids. It's not the easiest to learn, right? So communicate your plan. Families should know the basics at least of what happens to their child in an emergency, where are their pickup spots, and how staff will communicate with families and emergency responders. And thinking through, what if cell towers go down? Where then do we communicate? How do we communicate? Is there a landline? Can we get emails or texts or whatever out, even if cell towers go down? What are those alternative ways? All right, guys, let's talk about COVID for a second. Oh, also I should mention in the picture current, right, you're seeing, this is a YMCA program that has marked out in and outs to their bathrooms, as well as line markers that are socially distanced apart. So kids go in and out of the bathrooms on those lines. Make sure you either have an additional plan for COVID specific requirements and policies, or that you've added a spot in your emergency plans for COVID and pandemics. Have a space for your sick youth or staff to go that's separate from your main program, and then remember that you got to go back and then revise your abuse prevention programs if you're having an adult stay with those children, or are they in sight and sound area? What are you going to do? Draft your communication prior to opening if possible, or prior to, at least before you have an emergency, right, about transmission possibilities. What does that note look like out to your staff? What does that look like out to parents? And what are your policies going to be? We're going to talk more in just a second about policies and the things you need to think about for confirmed transmission. So I'm kind of like closing your program versus closing your classroom. What do you do if child's parents have tested positive? What protections does your program want to put in place, whether that's masks or temp checks or lowered enrollment, larger spaces, limiting outside adult interaction. I'm not allowed in to my son's childcare. And no adults are allowed in. Most people are suspending their volunteer programming as well to limit that outside adult interaction. And then check local, state, and district recommendations. And that is where this had ended prior to yesterday. Yesterday, Central District Health had a meeting in regards to recommendations to schools. And St. Luke's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jim Souza, made a whole list of points that I thought were fantastic. I think they're things that all programming outside of school as well need to think about. And so I added this literally this morning after his recommendations and talk through. I pulled these out of his conversation. And I just want to run through this list again. You'll get these slides and they will be available on the website if you want to come back and think through these questions. But these are the things that he was asking for programs and schools to think about. How do people enter your program? Where do they sit? And for us, programs, where are they going to work? Where are they going to do activities, right? How are they moving within the program? And how do you clean? How often do you clean? And I put this in the reopening guide that's available on the website as well. But for those of you who are in schools, who's responsible for cleaning? Is that you? I know most schools are not allowing children to do any cleaning. Is your program going to be professionally cleaned by the school? If you're outside of the school, are you paying for higher level cleaning? Are you doing that cleaning, etc.? Think that part through. You are going to probably have a student at some point, right, in the next year that becomes symptomatic, or a student that will disclose that they had a high risk exposure, like a parent or grandparent, right? How do you identify that student? Who do you notify about that student? Can you isolate the student, right? Are you going to require students to be tested? If you have a student that's symptomatic or has a high risk exposure, are you going to require them to be tested? How are you going to get students tested? How are families paying for testing? And what will that positive or negative mean for your program, right? Who in the program then does your contact tracing? And I recommend in our reopening guide that you assign someone that's all things COVID in your program, right? Because then you need to find out who that student came in contact with, and are other students, have other students or staff been exposed? And then how are you handling that contact? Again, do other students then need to be tested if they were exposed? Do you isolate an individual, the entire class, your whole program? Do you have a return strategy? How do you know when it's safe to then reopen your classroom or your program? Is it based on tests or symptoms? Everyone has to be tested prior to coming back, or everyone's okay, no one seems symptomatic and we're going to be okay with opening? What are you going to do differently after you have a first case? Is there anything, do you review your programming? Was it a fluke? Was it something that happened because of the way you programmed? So these questions came again from St. Luke's Chief Medical Officer, and I thought this was a fantastic list. I'm gonna make sure that this gets printed kind of in a checklist form and added to our reopening guide, because I thought this was a really more comprehensive way to think about those emergency action plans specific to COVID. I'm gonna stop for a second. Does anyone have questions here? Kind of running out of time. Did that make you all go, oh snap, I gotta think about a lot more stuff than I thought? I know it did for me.
Yeah, this could be its own training, right?
Right. Right, I know, I think we all thought, oh, we're gonna temp check, everyone's wearing a mask. And then it was like, oh, I didn't think about how kids get in and out of the bathroom, or I didn't think about, yeah, they told me their parent was sick, and now, wait, are they sick? Do I kick them out? Do they stay? I don't know, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even parents don't know. Like, I continually reach out to make sure what I'm doing is safe for my kids' daycare and what they're doing in their community. And we get messages every day. So yeah, it's going to be super important and definitely expected.
Right. It's just a whole list of things that I was like, oh, I did not. And I've written a bunch of these guidelines and I was like, oh, that's so much more than even I was thinking of. So yeah, we'll make sure this gets put in the reopening guideline. I know, Melissa, we're gonna not panic though, right? Not gonna panic. We're just gonna do our best. All right. We'll go through each. Oh, yes.
Diana, just one thing to add. I was in on the Ada County reopening conversation. I'm sorry, the Central District Health with the schools, and they had a doctor, an attorney. I think the problem with a program deciding on like requiring testing or saying they're going to have tracing is that there's not the capacity and they can't enforce that. And then there's also people with opposition to being mandated to do that. So it's like there's a lot outside of our control, even if we decide that that's going to be like a standard or a requirement. There's there are tons of like legal issues with it too. So it's just it's complicated.
Absolutely. But that's why I listed it as things we have to think about, right?
Yeah.
If we're not requiring testings, then we have to be okay with going off symptoms, right? And then we know that children tend to be more asymptomatic than adults, right? So then it becomes this whole list of things we know in Idaho that there are people who will not wear masks and don't want to wear masks. And then what do we do? Do they not come to programming at all? Do they, right? Mm-hmm. Those are things that your guys' programs are going to have to talk through. CDH is I know West Ada and Boise school districts will be mandating masks if and when schools open. But what does that mean for our ADA students? And what does that mean, right? There's a whole list of things that go with making these mandates.
And a big concern of theirs was liability. Like, is there some sort of waiver form? If kids aren't, then are we liable for, I'm sure you're dealing with that, Sheena, at a at a district or at a state level. And I think it's the big question still.
It is, and I know the waiver question that the school districts are dealing is only going to go so far. When you're talking about safety, I can't waive. There's only so much as a parent I can waive as public safety. I assume you're going to get my kids out in a fire, even if I signed a form that said I'm okay with fires. Like, that's not
right.
right.
Exactly.
That's not right. There's only a level that those waivers will go, and so.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, so it will work through it. And Melissa, I saw a wee bit of panic. We're gonna help. We're gonna work through it. I know for me, more information helps me lower panic, and we're hopefully gonna share as much of that with you guys as we can.
Yeah, and I think just parents having that written policy, having that transparency, then they can make that decision for their own family, right? So if you're transparent about what you're going to do and your procedures and how you're going to deal with it, that really gives them the power to decide, is that going to work for us or not? So
right.
Yeah,
I agree. All right, we're running out of time, so we'll go through this, and we can always come back, and I can stay on and we can talk about COVID if you want. Systems are in place. I'm gonna read this again. Systems are in place to protect youth from harm. Staff provide appropriate supervision for youth according to youth ages, abilities, needs, and the level of risk involved in your activities. And then I combined these together because I knew we would run out of time. They don't necessarily go together. Staff note when youth arrive, when they leave, and with whom they leave as appropriate. And there is a system in place to keep unauthorized individuals from taking youth from your program. I think most of you are meeting number one, right? That's your bread and butter as a youth safety, that that you have ratios, and that younger kids need higher number of adults. As older kids, you can get away with a few lesser adults. But, and again, I say go all the way back to intentional program design if you need help with your activities. But when you're considering or building an activity for your program, remember keep these questions in the back of your head. Can all youth participate at some level? Can older children help younger children? What special needs do you have in your program, and how do you work with them without counting them out? And I always say, always work for actual inclusion. It's very common and frustrating when you're like, yeah, I have this student with a special need, and they are going to click the play button on the music while the rest of the kids play the game. And in their heads, they've been included in this activity. They have not been included in that activity. That is not thinking through how kids participate in an activity. So please consider your kids with special needs. And when you're considering not only kids with special needs, but all your kids, is there a way for children to leave your activity, right? What do they do if they're frustrated or bored or on the verge of a meltdown? Can they leave, right? And where do they go? What do you do with them? And if you have kids who finish earlier, take longer, those are all youth safety. We put them in behavior in a lot of other places, but they're also a youth safety issue. If you have kids leaving your activity and kids who finished early and are leaving or sitting out, they still have to have appropriate staff, right? Do you have enough staff to do your activity as well as watch anyone not doing the activity? There you go. I just said that. So think those through. Have children register for your program. I know for those of you who are on, your kids register, but we have a lot of drop-in programs where kids just drop in. I would highly encourage those kids also have to register, and they can't come to the drop-in program until you have all the information on them, where they live, who they live with. Are they allowed to check themselves out? If they're not checking themselves out, who's picking up, who's dropping off, right? And if they are checking themselves out, where are they going? At least have that in your mind, even if you can't force them to walk there. If a parent is unable to do drop off or pick up, or there's an emergency for that parent, who are the backup contacts for that child? Who is allowed to pick them up in their replace? There might be on your registration form, a couple of people, and then you might want to have an additional form for those emergency times where the people on the form can't pick up and they need to sign or allow for someone else. My husband and I went, when I had surgery a few years ago, my parents went with me and my husband went with me. That's all of our emergency contacts. So we had to sign a form for my uncle to come pick up my children because they weren't going to come with me to surgery. And so we were able to fill out a form that said, this is the next person that we are allowing for that. Children sign in and they sign out, and that can be done by staff or a child. It can be done on paper, it can be done with swipe cards, it can be done with codes on a computer, whatever it is, they sign in and they sign out, becomes procedure. And then I know you guys already do this, but if you don't, you gotta count, right? You've counted every half hour, you count on the hour, you count at the start of every activity and at the end of the activity. Do you have all the kids that you are supposed to have, right? Know all the adults, right? Your staff and volunteers should be identifiable. They should be in shirts or name tags or visitor sticker, whatever it is that you know that those are the adults that are allowed in your program. If that isn't possible, then all adults need to check in with your staff member before interacting with your kids, right? You should know if there's an adult in your program and you don't know who that adult is, your staff needs to be trained to find out who that adult is, right? And what to do if that adult is not supposed to be there, right? Who do they call? Is there a security person, a manager, whatever it is, right? If you can, know the adults picking up the youth in your program. Ask for ID, check your forms, that's why you have the forms. Double check with your supervising adult if you don't know who this adult is that's picking up a child. Follow whatever plan your program has in place, but you don't let a child leave without confirmation that they're supposed to be leaving with that adult, right? Have a plan for when that adult has a problem with it, because eventually some adult will have a problem with it, and you have to have a really concrete plan, right? How do you separate other kids from the situation if you're in one big room? Who are you calling? Who are you contacting, right? To confirm that that adult has permission to leave with that child. And it will come up in custody disputes, right? Oh, I swear I'm supposed to go to my grandmother's today, whatever it is. You don't want to be the one that's responsible if the child went with someone they weren't supposed to, right? Talk about a legal issue. We are going to try this video. Actually, I'm going to skip this video because we're running out of time. Know that California After School Network does a quality standards in action video, and they have one on safe and supportive environments. And you can find this when you can watch this later on here, or you can look it up. It's really great. Just a reminder that we have a bunch of resources. If you've never been for some reason on our website, you can go to Building Block Resources under the Quality tab. You can click Resources, and we'll have a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. The COVID resources are separate currently, and you can find that reopening guide for the COVID resources under our COVID information right on our front page. Yeah, so, oh, well, that's not right. Building Block 7, ongoing staff support and volunteer development, will be next month. Sorry, I didn't correct that. We kind of got twisted in our last two here. But that will be in August 27th, 10 a.m. We're gonna treat this as though we have volunteers. And again, you may decide to not have volunteers this year or limited volunteers. But for future volunteer development, we'll still cover that. All right, I got you done right at 11, but I can stay on and answer any other questions, or if anyone else wants to talk, I can stay on for a little bit and do that with you guys. Otherwise, I will let you go.